third type of tissue that we want to look at today is muscle tissue. And it's relatively straightforward compared to the connective tissues, so you'll be glad we're moving into that. There are three types of muscle tissue, and they all have the same basic function. They all have the function of movement. Now you're most familiar maybe with skeletal muscle, which would be the biceps and the muscles that we think of doing workout to build up. But the other two types of muscle are just as important: smooth muscle and cardiac muscle. So the three types again: skeletal, smooth, and cardiac muscle. As we look at these, you'll see some similarities and you'll see some differences. So the first point that I would make is that muscles all have long fibers for cells. So rather than little circular or cuboidal cells, they have long, skinny fibers. And then the way that those fibers work and the presence or absence of these markings called striations will help us figure out what type of muscle we're looking at. So it doesn't matter what order we go in. I'm going to use the poster and start with smooth muscle. Smooth muscle fibers are said to be spindle-shaped, which simply means that they're somewhat tapered at one end and they are sort of maybe an elongated teardrop would be a way to picture them. They've got a single nucleus inside. So in this poster you see a darkly stained nucleus. And smooth muscle would be found on your internal organs. Smooth muscle is going to move substances along your digestive system, your reproductive system, and the various other organ systems. Smooth muscle we don't really think about because we don't really think of building that up, and we can't consciously control it. Smooth muscle is said to be involuntary. So you can't sit here and say, okay, stomach, push the food through. You just can't do that. You can't control smooth muscle voluntarily. So smooth muscle, no cross hatches in the fibers, no striations, and involuntary. That's how you want to remember smooth muscle. The middle one here, skeletal muscle, this is the one that you're probably most familiar with, forming the bulk of the muscles all over our skeleton. And it does have striations. So the fibers have what look like little hash marks across them. Those little hash marks are actually the proteins actin and myosin. And when we get to the muscle chapter, we'll take a closer look at how they work together. But striated fibers, you see that the nuclei actually get pushed to the side. So when you look at that in your textbook or on the website, you'll notice the nuclei actually get kind of shoved over along the sides of the fibers. And skeletal muscle we can consciously control. So as you sit there and eat popcorn, or maybe you're playing video games, hopefully not playing video games while you're listening to the video, you're actually consciously controlling your skeletal muscle. Your mind is able to help your body work those skeletal muscles. So skeletal muscle, striated and voluntary. Cardiac muscle, the third type, has a little bit in common with each of the previous two types. Cardiac muscle, though, is branched, so very distinctive because even at a glance you can see cardiac muscle is very highly branched. That's to allow it to communicate really well. Cardiac muscle, as the name implies, is only found in the heart. And cardiac muscle is striated, has those little crosshatch marks, the actin and myosin that we saw with skeletal muscle. So it's like skeletal muscle because of the striations. It's like smooth muscle in that cardiac muscle is involuntary. Again, you can't consciously sit there and say, okay, heart, beat faster. You might be able to influence your heart rate with various activities that you do, but you can't consciously stop your heart from beating or speed it up. So, smooth muscle, skeletal muscle, cardiac muscle. The only other thing I would mention about cardiac muscle, if you read about this and notice this online, the cells, the fibers have little almost zigzag marks that we call intercalated discs. And I always picture finger-like extensions. The intercalated discs really allow those two cells to interact. It increases the surface area, so rather than just having a blunt end meeting up with another blunt end, they have all these projections that really help them communicate. And again, we'll revisit that when we get to the cardiovascular system, so muscle tissue.